Hello and welcome. In this brush creator tutorial, we're going to be focusing on the texture tab right here. I'm going to switch to my tablet view, which I have set up to show just the brush creator, the background texture, and we'll switch to dual brush when we get to that portion of the video. I also have properties panel over here because these are going to be important. Now to the right, I have the texture that I'm using here. This is a custom texture, and this image is a 1024 by 1024 pixel image. This is the largest texture size that you can use. Now notice that this image has a lot of black and a lot of white and a lot of gray. And this is going to be really important in understanding how the background textures work. So let's look at the basic things first. There's an enable and disable button. When it's disabled, you can see we've got a very plain gouache liner. I have pressure turned off. I have the spacing set to 5. Opacity is also turned off. And when I say turned off, I mean it's not being affected by pressure. We have it set to 0. Shape and grain, you can see our shape and our grain. This shape is passing through completely this white grain. Again, this is like a lens on a flashlight. This shape is passing through. All the black is being cut out and just the shape is passing through. All right, let's go over here to textures and turn on our texture. Now this is set to normal by default. And as I'm pushing, I see a little bit here of this texture, but it's not really working when I'm painting like a paint stroke. So here in properties, what we can do is we can turn the loading down. Notice now that we have this nice texture being revealed. These textures, the background textures, these are tiled. That means that it will repeat over and over again. You can use random start and random offset, which we'll get to later, and shape texture. Now if we bring the loading down further, you can see what we're doing here is we're getting less and less paint to work with. So what this is affecting, because we're using an oil brush, this is affecting the impasto, the thickness of the paint. Let's turn this back up to 80 and look at the basics. So here you can tap here to select, refresh the library, choose small or large icons, import a texture which will open up a browser, or remove a texture using this button here. You can unpin this panel by clicking here and pin it by clicking on it again. Underneath we have the texture properties, scale, brightness, contrast. These do the same thing they did with our other shape and grains in the other sections of the brush creator. Opacity right here really could be listed right in the texture properties because this opacity is actually the opacity of this texture image. So keep that in mind when we're adjusting this here, which can be done with pressure, which is why it's down here and not up here. This opacity affects the opacity of, again, this file here. Now, this file, the blacks, the whites, the grays, that's what makes the texture show. So if this is mostly gray or very faint, it's going to have very little effect. To increase the effect, you can increase the contrast. So now, even with low opacity, we're still getting a strong effect. Here we can rotate the image, we can flip horizontally, and we can invert. With invert, we're painting on the other. Instead of the white, we're painting on the black. Let's look at multiply, inverse multiply, height, and linear height. The rest of these we're going to just touch on, but we're going to go into a bit more detail on these. So we've selected multiply. Now underneath is the depth slider. This slider here you can think of kind of like an amount slider. So how much multiplying are we going to do? we switch to another one, how much linear height this function, and this needs to be explained, how much of this are we going to be applying? This blend mode, the depth is affecting. To understand kind of how this works, if this is set to 0, this is 0 times 0, and up here, this is 1 times 1, which equals 1, which is the maximum amount possible. So here, these top 4, these are subtracting paint. A number of these here, as you go down, some are adding paint, normals adding paint. Some of these other ones are adding paint, and they're adding paint in the white areas or in the black areas. These top 4 are removing paint from the white areas or the black areas. Now, it's a little hard for me to remember, and so the way I think of it, and it's a little silly, height rhymes with white, and multiply and height are both one word, and so I think height, white, multiply, white. This is the area that we're painting on. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, now let's select multiply. Let's put the depth to 1. And here you can see what we're doing is we're painting on all the white section. The black sections are getting no paint. Here you can see what that looks like. Now if we switch to inverse multiply, we're painting on the black areas and we're removing paint from the white areas. If we decrease the loading, what we're doing is we're decreasing the amount of impasto, but it's doing the same process. It's painting, inverse multiply is painting on black. Let's increase loading back to 100. When we paint at 100%, we have the most difference between the thickness of the impasto. So we're painting, again, we're painting on the black here. So we've got the thickest impasto and the thinnest impasto, which is just flat. As we go to the left, what you're going to see is the difference between the low spots is decreasing. So now the white areas are getting closer to the same height as the dark areas. Notice here that it's almost gone. We go over here and we don't see anything. Let's do that same thing with multiply. Here, we're painting on all the white areas. As we decrease here, you can see the difference between the height of the paint. On the dark areas, they're becoming more and more the same. Let's decrease the contrast here. Now, with the contrast decreased, you'll notice that we're going to get to that place where we can't see it sooner over here. Just put multiply here on the screen, inverse multiply next to it. Height. Linear height, which is a softer version of height. It pulls in a little bit more of the grays, but it's doing the same process. Cutting in, lifting the dark areas, cutting in on the white areas. Let's go here to the bottom to subtract. Exclusion. Again, exclusion, this one is going to need the loading turned down. difference, hard mix, pin light. So all these have a variety of different effects. I encourage you to explore them, play around with them to really get a good understanding of how they work and what the effect is. Just keep in mind, if you're seeing nothing on some of these, you might need to set the depth slider slightly to the left to start seeing something. Now, use shape texture is using that shape here to cut out the texture from the background. If we just put a stamp here, you can see that we've got the shape of our brush, and then we've got the texture going right over the top. If you want to constrain that using the opacity and the edges and the shape here, then make sure that you select Use Shape Texture. Random Start will change the position of the background texture. Notice that our flower here has moved. Now every time I put the brush down, it's going to put a new starting position for the texture. Random Offset will take every stamp and start it someplace different on the texture. As you paint, this is going to turn into, as you paint, this will usually lose the texture. If you want to keep the texture, go to Stroke, increase your spacing, and you'll be able to see the texture over and over again. If you have it set low here, it's going to just overlay on top of itself. You can do both together. Use paper texture strength. Again, this is something you can use the curve editor for. Let's look at our paper. Let's increase our canvas. And select something with a bit more texture here. As we increase this here, you can see the texture of the canvas having more influence. Let's look at how this texture and the impasto work together when you're filling something in. Okay, we're going to turn paper texture strength down, and we're going to look at how this works. When we're combining this with watercolor. If we zoom in, we can see the differences a little bit easier. And what I want to show is how this works with watercolor and diffusion. Let's jump over to watercolor. I have a line or two selected already. So let's paint right across the top of this. And you'll see how this impasto is reversed here. So on the right side, this is like engraving. We're cutting in. On the left side, this is like embossing. We're lifting up. And so if you wanted to create an emblem or something, this would be a great way of doing it. You can see the white areas are pushing the paint off of them. The lifted areas are pushing the paint off. And over here, they're filling in. If you wanted to insert some gold paint or something beautiful inside an etched design, this would be how you do it. Let's select and enable dual brush. You'll notice that there's a blending mode here, blending modes here, in the second background texture, and in shape and grain. In shape and grain, there's a blending mode. This is not available on oils. And in paint, there's also a paint blending mode. This blending mode affects only paint on the same layer. So you can paint. This will affect how shape 1 and shape 2 interact. So if you had one shape and a different shape, it would remove parts of that shape. We're not going into this section right now, but want to explain how these are layered. Now, background texture 1 and background texture 2, these are stacked in order. Now, if we have these set, you can have one of them adding one of them subtracting, them working in tandem to create some really cool, very unique textured brushes. Depending on the mode you're using, you may not see the effect of the paper texture strength, in which case you can invert the paper texture. And you can start seeing here these lines, these fibers inside the paper showing up inside the texture, the paint that you're laying down. Let's disable our second background texture. Let's disable our first background texture, and let's look at dual brush. Let's enable it and zoom out. By default, angle jitter is set to 100, which means our star is going to spin. Let's turn this all the way down so we can see what's going on. We have depth here. Again, this is how much we're adding. So here, if we bring the depth low, we're going to have our original stroke, and we're going to be adding to it a little bit more, and can decide how much we're adding to the original stroke. Now, if we change this mode, you can see that we are removing this shape from this shape. So remember, multiply is removing white. So we're going to be combining these two shapes, removing the white areas here, being left with what's here, as you can see. Inverse multiply, we're removing the black areas here that are being combined together with our shape. Now this is extremely powerful, so a lot of playing and tinkering. Now for this next section, we're going to switch to a watercolor brush. We're going to make sure that our spacing, we're going to put this down at 5. For watercolor, spacing makes a big difference because it actually has water in every single splat. So you increase the water by increasing the spacing, and the spacing is being increased to the left. The lower the number, the more you're going to have water on the canvas from every single splat that goes on. Again, this 5 is these shape and grains. These are overlapping all but 5%. We're going to remove our paper texture contrast here. And paper texture strength. Our grain, we're going to use a pure white, and our shape, we're going to use the same shape we were using before. And we're going to remove the second shape. Now, a quick side note, if you have opacity set to work with pen pressure, if you're in shape and grain and you use the alpha blending lighten, this will give a fun effect of darkening with pressure and lightening with low pressure. Let's select our star again from the image library, use for stamp. This is every single time the stamp, this one right here, which is this combination, every time it goes down, it's going to be adding with it in a single action this second brush, the dual brush. If we use for stroke, this is going to be adding that on top of it, in addition to it, not with every single stamp. So notice here that we can space this out. Spacing here actually goes up to 1,000, which means if you want very random organic splats or dust or different elements to show up just every once in a while, this is how you do it, spacing up higher. Let's set our spacing back to 100. Notice I have multiply selected here, use for stroke. If you can see it here on this one, it's cutting into it. You see these little notches are this star shape cutting in. When we select use for stamp, notice that our spacing option is gone because it's using the spacing from stroke. Depth, this is removing again the white. Let's look at count. So count is set to 1. Notice that each time it puts down this image, how many is it putting down? You can see that we've got an increase. Every single splat now has way more of this star. Our spacing hasn't changed, so it's still 1 full square away. We can go as high as 20. Size, we can increase the size. Notice the star is much larger. Size jitter. Some are small, some are larger. Our opacity, notice size and opacity both have curve editors. We have those turned off for the moment to keep this easier to understand. Opacity of the star. Again, we have our depth set really high. Let's bring this down a little bit so we can see some of the original shape and grain stroke. Let's bring our opacity up. If we want the opacity up of the original star, we could change multiply so it's not removing. You can see with inverse multiply. Let's keep this at multiply for a little bit longer. Spacing. Every 100 is a full square. Shape and grain combo. It's a full square away from itself. So if you set this at a spacing of 500, it would be 5 squares away before you see it again. This is square, 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 square. And in that square, this area is being cut out and paint is passing through this white area. Let's put our spacing back to 100 and look at spacing jitter. So a randomizer for spacing. Scatter. This is moving it up and down a random amount. Minimum scatter means it's going to have a certain amount of scatter. It doesn't go below. Now we may want to choose use for stamp and take this off of multiply into normal. Let's reduce the size of our star. Our scatter. Minimum scatter. Notice that we can push these out using this. Again, this is randomizing the positioning. Minimum scatter means that we can make it start from further away. And our angle jitter. Notice all of these stars are point up, 2 points down. Angle jitter is going to randomize those. Now for follow trajectory, we're going to go back to use for stroke, multiply. I've decreased the size so that our star fits right here in the center. We turn off follow trajectory. Notice that the star is saying vertical the whole time. 1 point up, 2 points down. All right, that's it for the textures panel. If you have questions, put it in the comments section of this video. In the next video, we're going to be looking at creating some really cool brushes together using the brush creator. A couple different types of brush that you might be interested in creating, including some really cool grungy paintbrushes. Thank you for watching. Until next time, stay creative and have a wonderful day.